Welcome to my rant about the EU AI Act. This happened, the idea of the talk happened when, with some friends, we started reading the Act. And when we started reading the Act, we were like, what do we read? We should go, it's hard. It's going to be some legal language. We're not going to understand it. Maybe we should start with some summaries that are out there and people talking about the Act. That probably makes it much easier. We went and read a few of those, and they all were talking about the same thing without giving any concrete, actionable thing that as a practitioner I would be able to really do. So we started reading. And when you start reading, there is like the single PDF, but the one that you usually end up reading is this website, if you want to read the actual Act. This is the text of the Act. It's a better version of it in terms of representation and like how it's sectioned and all, but it is the actual text of the Act. And it has sections like, okay, what's prohibited, what's high risk, and like everything that you've heard about the Act are like obviously included here, and then you go through them, it has governance and everything. The good thing is it has links between like the recitals, the annexes, they're all hyperlinked, so it makes it much easier to read. So we started, and then we realized there is so much in the Act that nobody really talks about. There are certain gems that, in a sense, every week, it was like a book club. Every week that we met to talk about the Act, we were angry about something about the Act. So this talk is mostly about the things that made me angry while reading the Act. Okay, so, and we are also going to read blobs of texts copy-pasted from the Act to kind of train our brain muscles to be able to read that text. It's not the hardest legal text, but it's definitely not written as you would write a novel. So what is the Act about? It's about harmonized rules for the placing on the market, the putting into service, and the use of AI systems in the Union. It's also about prohibitions of certain AI practices. We'll go through them. And specific requirements for high-risk AI systems and obligations for operators of such systems. We also go through them. Harmonized transparency rules for certain AI systems. Harmonized rules for the placing on the market of general-purpose AI models. And when we talk in the sense of AI Act, when we talk about general-purpose AI model, we are mostly talking about LLMs and diffusion models and like all of those large models. Rules on the market monitoring, market surveillance, governance, and enforcement. And measures to support innovation with a particular focus on small and medium-sized enterprises, including startups. Okay, so this is what the Act is about. When does it apply to you? It applies if you are in the EU market, your model is available in the EU in case of a large model. The output of an AI system using the model is available in the market. You might be outside the market, but your output is used by a company or by an entity inside the market, then this applies to you. You import something to the market, like they implement Llama outside the EU, but you want to have it here, then you're importing it. You represent an outside of market entity for their model in the, or AI system in the market. All of these, basically, if you're here, it applies to you. Okay, looks pretty good. Now it starts. So this whole thing has a few exceptions. And these exceptions don't apply to certain parts of the Act. These exceptions apply to the whole Act. This regulation shall not, in any event, affect the competencies of the member states concerning national security, regardless of the type of entity entrusted by the member state with carrying out tasks in relation to those competencies. Okay. Can you think of some cases where this applies? Drones. Drones are usually used outside the EU, but, but if they were, then yes. Border control is yes and no. As in, if you argue that a case in border control is risking your national security, then yes, but actually border control and enforcement is included in the high-risk cases. But if you have good lawyers and they argue that no, it's against your national security, then you're completely off the hook. Next, this regulation does not apply to AI systems in or out of the EU market when it is used exclusively for military, defense, or national security purposes, regardless of the type of entity carrying out those activities. Okay, let's go build tanks. And my favorite. This regulation applies neither to public authorities in a third country nor to international organizations where those authorities or organizations use AI systems in the framework of international cooperation or agreements for law enforcement and judicial cooperation with the Union or with one or more member states, provided that such a third country or international organization provides adequate safeguards with respect to the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals. Well, these days, I guess we all know how the West sees which country respects human rights and which ones don't. So when I read this, I just could laugh. Okay, interesting. So these are the blanket exceptions. Also, if you're not planning to provide or deploy your system in the EU market, it doesn't apply to you. So you might do something which, according to this, is completely banned or is high risk. If you're planning to sell it, I don't know, to some other country, let's say I'm from Iran. If you want to sell it to Iran, you can all do it. You're fine. Then, most summaries represent the Act with such a plot. The Act looks at cases in a pyramid of how risky they are and how much harm they can induce to individuals. You have some unacceptable risks that are banned. You have some high-risk cases, which most of the discussions would be around the high-risk ones. That would be probably the cases you might be working with. And then what do you need to do in order to be able to deploy those systems, or what do you need to do in order to provide, basically put in market the large models that you provide. And then a little bit you need to do for things that are less risky. What are things that are banned? Exploiting vulnerabilities, age, disability, socioeconomic background, to distort behavior and harm. Okay, makes sense. Social scoring systems causing unfair or disproportionate treatment. Predictive policing based solely on profiling and personality traits. Untargeted scraping of facial images to build recognition databases. Okay. But also, one thing about the Act is that it does not prevent EU member states to pass laws that are more strict than the AI Act. And recently, I don't know if it's passed or no, but there's been the discussion, I read it in the news, I don't remember if it's passed or no, but Denmark's law, if it's proposed or passed, is that each individual has the right to copyright their own face and voice. And platforms are liable to make sure that deepfakes of those individuals are removed from the platform. The Act doesn't give you those rights, but each member state can do that. Time to move to Denmark. Emotion recognition in workplaces or schools, unless it's for medical or safety reasons. Biometric categorization inferring sensitive traits like race, religion, etc. And then manipulative, subliminal, or deceptive AI that distorts behavior and harms people. Advertising? Advertising sugar, tobacco, alcohol, I don't know, so many things. So good, this makes me happy. But common and legitimate commercial practices, for example, in the field of advertising that comply with the applicable law should not, in themselves, be regarded as constituting harmful, manipulative, AI-enabled practices. Very interesting. Then why do I have that point then? So, move on. real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces by the police. And we've had this like I think it was the UK that like there would be like a police car that would have like a facial recognition on top of the car, and they would like find people that they are supposed to be arresting. And then obviously those systems are really bad when it comes to certain categories of people with certain skin colors, and then it says arrest that person, and then the cop arrests them, and they're like, I'm obviously not that person. Like, look at me. Like, the computer says yes. And then when you look at the text of what are the banned cases, like, okay, like it starts like listing things very simple. These are banned, and then when it gets to this case, this real-time remote biometric identification, it's banned unless it's strictly necessary for one of these things. And then it goes on, but it needs to be registered. And you have to get permission from your judicial system. But if you think it's urgent, you can already deploy it, but then like post facto, you ask like your judicial system. And then like all of that, it's like a kind of a back and forth that you feel here, and the rest of the document is just about that. And then you wonder why. All of this was happening when the act was being passed and discussed, and like it was the latest stages was December 23. And Spain was the president of the Council of the European Union, and as the president, you said what are the legislations that we should like work on. And they were worried that Belgium coming in right after would shelf this act. So that was one thing. They were like, okay, we need to get this done, or it might not get done at all. Like the case we had with like abandoning daylight saving in the EU that got passed, then Corona came, then it got abandoned. And also at the same time, France was going to host Olympics 2024, and they were championing for making sure they can use these systems when they are hosting the Olympics. So as a result of that, all of that discussion happened, and all of those cases were added. So it's not really banned. It's just like, it is, but it isn't, you know. So hopefully it gets better from this point. So moving on from the banned cases, we get to the high-risk cases. And high-risk cases are like basically two categories. One category is like Annex 1, and it's like basically if your AI system is used as a safety component of something, a product, or it is a product itself, which is listed in the following annex. Or what more matters to us is if it's one of these cases, Annex 3. Biometrics, including emotion recognition, critical infrastructure, education and vocational training, employment, workers management, access to self-employment, access to and enjoyment of essential private and public services and benefits, law enforcement, migration, asylum, and border control management, and also administration of justice and democratic processes, like manipulating democracies. Okay, and also like you can conclude that like, okay, like basically it means like AI used in media, recommender system, a lot of like science, when we do like research in medicine where like mostly women are ignored, when we do like drug discovery, most of finance and training, and like so much can be then high risk. But maybe a lot of them are not high risk. Well, it does give you a way out. Basically, you can argue your case is not high risk if it performs a narrow procedural task, improves the results of a previously completed human activity, or it's basically QA, like quality assurance on decisions made before, but it doesn't change the decisions made before, or it is performing a preparatory task for something else. And it never, like this exclusion does not apply when you're profiling people. It makes sense. Okay, I'm making like a lot of things high risk, but like I give you a way to like get out of it. Except this list is a list that a lot of advocates would have wanted to have in the list of high risk cases, and they're not. So, and on top of that, the cherry on top, providers can argue that they're not risky, yeah. And those conditions are pretty vague. So if you have good lawyers, like a lot of your use cases, they can argue they're not risky. And also, the check is done post-deployment. When you register your case, when you register your system, you say, I did my homework, and I concluded that it's not high risk. You don't, at the time of registration, after which you deploy and you're done, you do not provide the documentation for why you think it's not high risk. And the burden is on the authorities to come back and ask you to provide that documentation and check post-deployment. And none of that is public. All of that is it is under confidential agreements. Okay. So let's say now you are in the high-risk area. Some of the things that you need, one of the things that you need, among other things, is a technical documentation of your system. And it kind of makes sense. It looks like a good model card, extended. You have to have things that are like risk management and changes, compliance evidence, post-market monitoring plans. Those are the things that are rather clearly explained in the Act and you can implement. And there will also be guidelines coming out of groups that are collaborating with the Commission to provide those guidelines. And you can say, okay, I followed this guideline, or you can say, I read the Act and this is my reading of the Act, therefore I did my homework. Not the worst. But if you're in law enforcement, border control, immigration, or asylum authorities, this information never leaves your site, like the homework that you did, that you are actually compliant. The information is shared only after consultation with the relevant authority using and deploying the system. The fact that they are using a high-risk system does not get entered into the same public database that everybody else has to put the fact that they have a system in that public database. And note that that public database doesn't really include that much information. And only strictly necessary information is shared. And on top of that, again, we'll talk about it, but there is a thing called notified body that are the entities that audit whether or not you're compliant. The conformity assessment and everything is done by those bodies. In this case, the public sector itself is its own notified body. So no third-party audit is going to happen there. Whew. Any questions? So, I'm going really fast. One of the other things that you need to have when you have a high-risk system is human oversight. And human oversight goes through things that you need to do, it makes sense. You need to always have somebody watching over it. It needs to it can help your decision instead of making decisions for you, all of those things. But particularly, one of the parts says, the oversight measures shall be commensurate with the risks, level of autonomy, and context of use of the high-risk AI system. Sure. If it's not doing much, then I don't need to watch over its shoulders that much. And I need to have measures that either the provider has put in the model or the provider told me that I should put in my system when deploying the system. And here's the Act distinguishes the provider and the deployer, and you can think of it, the provider is the one creating the model, the deployer is the one using the model in its system. In most cases that are not large models, you're both the provider and the deployer. If you're training a logistic regression, you're the provider and the deployer. And then, remember, the first point of Annex 3 high-risk cases was remote biometric identification systems were considered high risk. Okay, now, for high-risk AI systems, refer to this part that we just saw, and measures to refer to in paragraph 3, which is the one that we just read of this article, shall be such as to ensure that in addition, no action or decision is taken by the deployer on the basis of the identification resulting from the system, unless that identification has been separately verified and confirmed by at least 2 natural persons with the necessary competence, training, and authority. Okay, nice, not too bad. Of course, there's a catch-22. The requirement for a separate verification by at least 2 natural persons shall not apply for high-risk AI systems used for the purposes of law enforcement, migration, border control, or asylum, where the union or national law considers the application of this requirement to be disproportionate. It's okay. They made sure that they are not caught in the act themselves. Okay. Another part of the act is about general purpose AI systems, and based on the summary you read, you might get the impression that the whole act is about like LLMs or not. It really isn't, but a good part of it is. And the requirements apply when you are a high-impact GPAI model. And what does it mean to be high impact? There are certain things that it counts, like it would make it, capabilities that it would make it like as high impact, therefore as high risk. Or if training that model took more than 10 to 25 flops. And the commission has the right to change that number if technology advances, whether that number goes high or low. For example, right after this, not right after, but after this came out, a lot of the, in the order of 7 to even like 70B models that are being produced are quite a bit lower than this threshold because of the new techniques that we have to train like LLMs. So for instance, I think it was Llama 2 when it was released, because they were just above this threshold, Meta decided not to really release the model in the EU because by default, they were under this, and they were not sure what are the actual requirements for them to be able to provide this model in the market. But even if you are high impact by this, you can get out of it. You can write a document and say, for these reasons, I don't think I'm really high impact. I'm not that good. Therefore, I shouldn't be considered as high impact. Okay, at least here you have to do that at the time you provide the model in the market and you register that. That's the difference between you registering your high-risk model from the Annex 3 in the database. Okay, not too bad, maybe. Okay, changing gears. This introduces a lot of work for a lot of people. One of the things that the commission wanted to consider was, okay, if you're a small team, if you're a startup, maybe this would make it really hard for you to be able to do things, mostly work on LLMs. Like, you're like, okay, like you want to do things, you want to innovate, sure, you should be able to do that. So the regulation does not apply if the AI systems or AI models prior to their, like it doesn't apply to them prior to them being placed on the market. If you're just developing it, you don't have to go through all of that regulation. But if, at the point that you start testing it, then this applies to you. There is also a whole sandbox mechanism like that you can use, and if you are a startup, you have priority access to them, it's cheaper for you, like all of those, that the commission allows you in a controlled environment to test these high-risk systems. If you're doing it for scientific research, it doesn't apply to you. If you are going to release that under some open source license, it also doesn't apply to you. This is a little bit vague what counts as open source, but it doesn't. Unless it is banned or it's a general purpose AI model. Also, you get, as a small or medium-sized enterprise, you get priority sandbox access, again, the thing that allows you to test. You get some support and training from the commission. You have lower compliance costs. You have a voice in standards, like they make sure that some representatives from these enterprises are included in all the teams that talk about, okay, what should be the guidelines. Not only big companies are represented there. And you get some EU-level assistance. Not bad. So, in the machinery itself, there are two things at least that you can do, that you can use that, okay, there's this regulation, I can benefit from this regulation by being a part of this machine. One of them is you representing entities that are not in the EU for them to be able to provide or deploy models in the EU. And then if you do that, then you're basically the person responsible you're the person between the EU Commission and that entity, sure. The next one is a notified body, which is you do the independent conformity assessment for organizations. You issue EU certificates, basically as a part of the EU AI Act. In your system, you put a CE mark that you see on a lot of hardware, like on your phone and your chargers. And as a notified body, you get like a unique 4-digit number that you put beside that. Okay, not bad. And then the member states have certain criteria to select you. You need to be like, you need to satisfy those, sure. And then you have certain obligations that you need to do in terms of record keeping and things that you do, sure. All of that good. Again, it is only, might be required in biometric cases. And CE marking can be applied only after an internal assessment is done by the provider. So if you do your work again internally, you can put the CE mark and say like, hey, I'm compliant. Nobody looked at me, but I'm compliant. And also, this is an act that was heavily influenced by these same players when it was written, and they are themselves the ones that are supposed to check themselves against the act. And the last point is the question of what's the relationship between AI fairness and the act. When it comes to data and data governance, Article 10 in the Act, we have examination in view of possible biases that are likely to affect the health and safety of persons, have a negative impact on fundamental rights, or leads to discrimination prohibited under the Union law, especially where data outputs influence inputs for future operations, or appropriate measures to detect, prevent, and mitigate possible biases identified according to point F. Which is a vague way of talking about AI fairness, sure. And it also, this is where it connects to GDPR. It basically allows you to do that even though GDPR exists. Basically, as long as there is no alternative for you other than using these protected attributes, you use your state-of-the-art privacy measures, you delete the data as soon as you don't need it, you can use protected attributes in order to talk about fairness. But fairness, like when it comes to fairness and regulation, fairness is a contested concept. Any definition of the fairness stems from a sort of ideology. There is no definition of fairness that has nothing to do with the ideology of the proponent of that definition. We have a thing called fair washing. You give me an algorithm, I'm pretty certain almost that we can come up with a definition of fairness that sounds legit, and according to that definition, you pass the tests. And those definitions contradict one another. If you optimize for one, you're losing on the other. And it depends on what is your view of a fair world. Therefore, this part is very, very vague and very open to discussion, and people are working on it. And with that, I thank you.
I think we have 2 minutes to get some questions, or anyone.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I think that the first question is, which is the legal background of the AI Act? Because when you have European laws, usually you have strictly defined context. For example, if it's only about the single market, then a regulation or a directive that is about the digital market cannot have effect on other part or other treaties related, for example, to security or defense. So what is not clear to me is what are the sectors that provide the basis for this act.
What are the sectors that provide the basis for the act?
Yeah. So, for example, the digital single market, the creation of a European network.
Oh, I have no idea.
Ah, okay.
No
That's
idea.
it. Thank you.
Right. So, yeah, maybe one more.
Thanks a lot for the talk. I'm wondering, what is the definition of AI in the AI Act?
Oh, there is a rather okay-ish definition that in most real cases, it is very clear to you if you pass it or not. Basically, if you're making decisions, if you have a bunch of rules extracted from data, and the rules are not set by humans, then it is AI. Which means a decision tree trained on data is definitely AI. You writing a bunch of rules is definitely not AI. But when it comes to old school rule-based systems that you would try to extract the rules from some sort of data mining, like all of that, and then have rules that like you look at and then you deploy, then that becomes like the gray zone. But otherwise, machine learning AI, like everything that we usually think of AI, is AI.
Okay, yeah, I think we are out of time, and let's give a applause for Adrian.
Thank you.